Hi, Sabine. Lovely to meet you.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I guess I'll just introduce myself to everyone else who doesn't know me. My name's Andy, Andy McCandless, and I'm an IBM champion this year. And Sabine, if I hand it over to yourself.
My name is Sabine Diemt, and I'm an IBM champion this year as well. And my normal day-to-day job is being a pilot on Elliott 60 XR, which is a business jet.
Right. Well, we both have the same interests, I think would be the best way of calling this. We've both got an interest in aviation. You're a pilot, so you're not just an IBM champion, you're also a pilot, so you have much more background, much more knowledge, and many more skills. But I think before we even go into that, what we should do is just try and explain some of the things that people may not know about aviation, because I was surprised at some of the things I found. And I know that in doing some research, some of these jumbo jets can be quite old that are flying.
Yes.
And I think I've seen some of them that could be 30 years old. And I learned that some of them have got maybe 200 kilometers of wiring inside it, which I was, wow. And I know that some of the technology on there can be quite old. And this is something you was telling me about. So would you like to give me a little bit about some of the technology that you've encountered?
Yes, absolutely. So, like you say, some of the aircraft are old, but nobody has to be afraid because they are well maintained and on a regular basis maintained. But still, the equipment that's inside is from the time that they were manufactured or maybe a bit after. So when we do database updates, for instance, depending on the aircraft type, we might use floppy disks, we might use zip disks. We use a laptop with Windows XP because something newer the aircraft cannot handle, so we do the updates through that. The issue there is in case you want to upgrade your equipment on the aircraft, you need a lot of approvals from civil aviation authorities, from manufacturers, because it needs rigorous testing to make sure that everything is still working properly. So this costs a lot of money. So nobody really wants to do any upgrades if it's not really necessary.
Yeah, and as you say, it's also there's limited space. I think is the other thing. It's very difficult once you've put something in on some of these planes. You've got so little space. It's very difficult to actually take it out, put something else in. The turnaround time on the planes is quite crucial as well. But as you say, the planes themselves are vigorously checked. They're very safe. It's just that some of the technology in the sky, in terms of what's in the planes, may be old. And as we're going to hear, some of the technology may be old technology, but in a more modern environment, and some of it could be very modern technology. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I know as a pilot, one of your, shall we say, issues is the system that you use called NOTAM. So would you like to tell people about that and what that is?
I'm happy to. So NOTAMs stands for Notice for Airmen, or in the US, they renamed it Notice for Air Missions. So basically, through the NOTAMs, we get all the information about which is critical for our flights. For instance, closed runways or some danger areas which are active, some equipment which is unserviceable, all the stuff like that. But also, if there are masts, if there are construction going on around the airport. So we also get a whole bunch of unnecessary information, unfortunately. What makes it more difficult for us is that the NOTAMs are based on a very old system. So they are in place since many, many decades, and everything is written in capital letters. You try to keep it short, so you have a lot of abbreviations in there, because all that is transmitted through AFTN, which is Aeronautical Fixed Telecommunication Network, which is something like telex. So we have all this bunch of information we have to go through before every flight to make sure we have the critical information, but sometimes it's just buried underneath some irrelevant information. So that's a huge issue that we have there.
And how much information could you be looking at before a flight? Because it's quite a lot, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah. I looked up an example flight from Geneva to Zurich. That's around 25 minutes flight time. And for that short flight, I found 59 active NOTAMs.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and there were a lot of them. For instance, Geneva had 14 NOTAMs, 9 of which were about location or height of poles, cranes, and buildings, which I don't really care about, to be honest. I want to know, is the airport open? Is anything critical not operating? Stuff like that. And if you take a long-haul flight, you can easily have 100 pages of NOTAMs. So you cannot blame any pilot missing an important NOTAM in the end, but that can be life-threatening in the worst case.
I'm hoping we may be able to show an example NOTAM on the screen just to give people an idea of what we're looking at here, because it's when you're talking about so many before a flight, it was mind-blowing. It's like its own language. I mean, this is a system that predates ASCII. It's so old. That's why it's all in uppercase. It's a really old system.
Yeah. We have some software nowadays which tries to help us with going through the NOTAMs, which tries to mark important NOTAMs, but it doesn't catch everything. So sometimes you have a flight and now it's April, you see the NOTAMs which are for June. I don't care about that. It doesn't filter it out.
It's interesting you say that. I think from what you was telling me before, there's a lot of information in these NOTAMs that could be tidied up as well, that you're seeing a lot of messages and it's hard to sort of see, as we would say in the UK, the wood from the trees.
Yeah, and there is actually rules that NOTAMs should not be active for too long and should not renew too often, and they have to be deleted from the system or implemented in other aeronautical information if it's permanent information. But many countries, unfortunately, don't stick to that, which makes our job really difficult in that regard.
And I think something else you were telling me is that a number of pilots have got together and they're looking to try and campaign to improve NOTAMs for pilots to make the messaging better.
Yes, so far there are a few countries which tidied up their NOTAMs, but we still have the issue. I mean, if you look 2 years ago, there were 37,000 active NOTAMs. And more than 10% of those were 3 to 12 months old. And an active NOTAM should never be older than 3 months.
Yeah.
We still had 9% which were older than 12 months. So, and in total, there were 1.7 million NOTAMs.
And I think part of this issue is not that the software or the way it's being done on the ground, it's that because the planes, as we've already discussed, can be quite old, not really old, but obviously to update the software and to update, it's quite difficult because you need to get consent, you need time, you need all these factors that you don't have in aviation. So it's going to take a sort of an agreement from everybody to actually improve the NOTAMs. It's not a simple overnight thing. It will need agreement from a lot of countries to make this work.
Yeah, basically every single country, because all the countries, all the airports are connected to that network. So every single one has to agree on a common solution.
Yeah, and I think when people see what you have to go through before a flight, they'll be amazed, because I was.
Yeah.
And that sort of takes us on nicely, I think, towards another issue that happened in aviation around the same time. Again, a freak kind of event, Winter Storm Elliott. So I'm guessing you could obviously just give us some background, but a freak storm means that you can't fly, and it can be quite an impact on aviation when these things happen.
Yeah, and it messes up the schedules of the airlines. You don't have the aircraft where they are supposed to be, so it basically messes up all the schedule. Yeah.
And I think this was what we see with Southwest Airlines. And one of the key things we both want to address is the way that the messaging around the mainframe. We've got the messaging around NOTAMs, and we've also got as we're both IBM champions, we'd like to correct the messaging that goes out around the mainframe. Because one of the things that happened with it was that there was a lot of news journalists and publications in the rush to get the story out were suggesting that the mainframe would break, the mainframe couldn't cope, the mainframe wasn't suitable. And in fact, none of that was true with Southwest Airlines.
Yeah, they blamed both the NOTAMs and the Southwest Airlines incident on the mainframe, right? And I know you got in touch with General Electric to get to the bottom of this. What did you find out there?
Yeah, well, I actually spoke to Perry Bradley. He's the media executive at General Electric, and he told me that it wasn't their software that was at fault. The issue had happened that it was a freak storm, caused freak problems, and the way that the Southwest Airlines were scheduling their flights and their crews, and then trying to use the software for a freak event, meant that software that was meant to schedule forward was being asked to look at things that had happened in the past that hadn't taken place, and the software just wasn't designed to do what it was being asked. And what he also told me as well, he said it's the software that they're reporting. They're calling it Sky Solver. He said, we've actually retired that name. He said, we're now using something called the Network Operations Platform. And the part that Southwest Airlines were using is crew optimization. And then he went on to say, there was all sorts of issues around this that they were being blamed for. There was talk of a $1 billion loss in Q4 because of the mainframe not working. 90% of flights were being blamed on the mainframe not flying. Nearly 17,000 flights were cancelled in about 10 days. And all of this at the time, there was all these big publications saying, well, it's the mainframe. It didn't do its job. It couldn't cope. Now, we both know as IBM champions, we've got a Z series mainframe. And Z, as we both know, stands for zero downtime. And it turns out that when I spoke to Perry in a bit more depth, what he was able to share is that there was a presidential investigation requested. There was all sorts of issues came out. And the main thing we saw was that the mainframe was actually the solution. Southwest Airlines worked with GE to address the issue, to find new software and to find a solution so that going forward, they had software that would allow them to work and cope in a freak situation like we saw.
So hopefully when the result of the investigation comes out, hopefully the journalists will pick that up as well and set the story right.
Yeah, and you can understand it to a certain extent that there's a rush to get the story out. So sometimes you just say, well, hey, this sounds the most likely cause, I'll run with that. But really what you would hope is that as seasoned journalists, they verify their sources first. Doesn't take a lot, but we're both IBM champions. We've got a community of IBM champions. And if there's a story they're not sure of where they think, is it a mainframe problem or has it been caused by some other technology talking to the mainframe, working with the mainframe? If they come to our community, we can obviously help them because sometimes there's been bank issues, and I'm not going to name any particular banks, but I know that certain articles have been published saying, well, that was a mainframe problem. And again, we know as a community that it wasn't our mainframe again. And our mainframe, as you will know, and I know, is cutting edge. We're some of the most advanced technology out there, believe it or not, for people. And this is the thing that we need to get across. Our message somehow is getting lost in there. From our community out, we're not getting our message out that we are a really modern platform. The mainframe could just be thought of as a very advanced server nowadays because it's fully capable of doing everything that you could do elsewhere. And this is what we really need to get out, is our message that we're a great platform. We've got great reliability. That's why mission critical systems are using us. And this is what you hope that at the end of this, people take from our talk, that they'll come and speak to our IBM community. They'll clarify their sources, and the narrative around the mainframe will be, actually the mainframe isn't the problem, but it's the solution.
Absolutely. I hope so too.
Well, Sabine, it's been lovely to talk to you. And I know that if we keep this talk nice and short, it's great for everybody, because then they can go on with their day and just pass on and have something just to watch during their lunch breaks and on the way to work. So I'd like to thank you for meeting with me. And thank you for all the advice and information you gave me in advance of this meeting. And I hope I've done it justice in presenting it for you.
Thank you very much, Andy. It was a pleasure being here with you.
Thanks, Sabine.